It seems to me that, cannabis has so many effects, right? And relax, energize. Do you see that as being a key part of the brand, as part of the packaging, so the consumer knows what to expect if he or she or they have not, bought that product before? Do you see that being a key part of what needs to be delivered? The message is part of the message.
Yes. Yes, but that's a tough question to answer, because yes, in its most simplest terms, there's sativa, which tends to be up, and there's indica, which tends to be down. And the terpenes that are included in indica and sativa are very similar to aromatherapy. So indica is high in linalool. Linalool is found in lavender and chamomile, so it's relaxing. Pinene and limonene, which is really pine and citrus, are found in sativas, which are uplifting. And so in its most simplest terms, yes, there's that. But when you start to extract flower, you start to lose the terpenes, you start to save only the THC, and that either isolate or distillate ends up in beverages and or edibles. And so the up or down, depending on the form factor, may or may not come across. And on top of that, dare I say, everybody's different. So it's really unique. So I think we can talk in generalities when we could say this is uplifting, or, this is sedating or relaxing or calming. But it's a tough call, to be honest with you.
And that's, if we're talking about branding the product, there's also branding the company, right? The dispensary, the retail store, the experience. Can you speak to that? The different sort of, the different ways to brand the experience, and not as well as the product.
Sure. So that I go back to, again, I'll go back to the customer, which leads me all the way back to the brand archetypes. And let me just, there are 14 brand archetypes, and actually there's a few more. And I should also say that I'm happy to add more to this list, right? Because that's what it's all about. I'm not sitting here saying there's only 14. And on top of that, they're not mutually exclusive, right? So they can overlay on top of each other. But generally speaking, the brand archetypes are types of brands. And then depending on the type of brand you're creating, that has everything to do with how you speak to your customer and really who your customer is. So for example, there's a cultivator brand, there's a gender brand, a foodie brand, a health and wellness brand, a counterculture brand, a prohibition brand, a nostalgic brand, a charity brand, a luxury brand, a value brand, an art and design brand, a regional brand, a novelty brand, and a celebrity brand. And so if we take a brand like Whoopi and Maya, which is benefit specific, women focused, it is, because it's Whoopi Goldberg, a celebrity brand. It is women focused, so it's a gender brand, and there's a charity component to it as well. So that's one example which sort of which fits a number of the archetypes. But, the question you asked a moment ago, let's say it's a cultivator brand. That tends to be more of a connoisseur who's looking at that brand. They're interested in the cultivars. They're interested maybe in perhaps the appellation, which can also become a regional brand. They're interested, is it grown indoors or outdoors? Whereas a nostalgic brand, like maybe an Old Pal or a Vacation, they're really, talking to probably, dare I say, the older you get, the more nostalgic you are. So, right, so they're talking to an older customer. They're often using strains that were popular in the 70s and 80s, right? So they're bringing people back to their youth. They're using soundtracks and songs to sort of, bring people back as well. So they're all of these different types of brands, or celebrity brand. I mean, you could have Justin Bieber with Peaches. You could have, right now, I think there's 56 or 57 celebrity brands that exist. So depending on who that celebrity is and what they stand for, right? There's so many different places that cannabis brands can meet a cannabis consumer.
I mean, we could talk about this forever. I'm thinking, so you're a new operator, right? You know, you want to establish your brand and you're not sure who you are at that point or what you want to be. How do you start? I mean, what does the process of branding look like, you know, for people that have not gone through it before? I mean, I'm sure it's second nature to you, but you know, where do you start?
Yeah, well, I think you look for the hooks initially, and when I say hooks, you know, you look for the special things that are about you. What makes you unique? You know, are you in Mendocino? Are you in Humboldt? Therefore, you're a regional player, and you have history that you can harken back to. Are you a celebrity brand? You know, is that something you're going to talk about? Are you a brand new New York brand, and so you've got a harder edge, and you know, there's something East Coast, very East Coast about you. But depending on where you are and what your backstory is, and what you bring to the table, you know, are you a social equity brand? Are you a brand with brand owners that come from the LGBTQIA plus community? You know, what's your perspective? And really, I always ask the brand owners, what value do they bring to the industry? You know, that's always, and not only to the industry, but really to their customer, right? What
Right.
value do they bring? And I always start off with, a brand is a promise and the ability to consistently deliver on that promise. Now, what that promise is up to you. You know, you can make the bar very high, you can put the bar on the floor, but you know, you could be a value brand. You can be, you know, cheap weed is your brand, and you get what you pay for is your tagline, right? You know, that's an easy bar to hurdle. So as long as you can deliver on those expectations and the promises you offer up, I think you're good. But that said, it really comes back down to the value that you bring, and really, then your question was, if you don't know, so to speak, who your target customer is, how do you find that target customer? And I would say you should have an idea of who you want to appeal to at the very least. And that may evolve over time. And that's okay.
Mhm.
You know, you have to jump in the pool to see if the water's cold, or at least put your foot in the
Just
pool.
gotta start, right? Yeah.
Is the water too cold? Okay, I need to go put a wetsuit on. Is the water too warm? Then maybe I should let the water cool down. Whatever it is, but there's always readjusting,
Mhm.
um, you know, and that's natural. But you should really come at it with a place where you add value, and there's something that differentiates you and your product.
Okay, let's sort of change tacks here and talk about, you know, the challenges. You know, multi-state. You know, obviously the branding, what you can do in Michigan, you may not be able to do in New York, for instance. How about those challenges? And then, you know, I think you had used a bottling plant analogy. You know, and perhaps that comes into play here, where, you know, there's how do you brand across states, and how do you get your product into different states?
Right. Well, okay, so we'll start off, and the bottling analogy is what I use all the time, and it really comes down to this. In the bottling world, uh, the soda world or cola world, um, the reason why there are bottling companies is because it doesn't make sense to move water or carbonated water across the country. So what the brands do, which is, you know, a Coca-Cola corporate or a PepsiCo, they create brands, and they create the SOPs that surround those brands, the all of the processes that support that, and they push those SOPs out to the bottling companies. And the bottling companies have all the right machinery, and they can make a consistent product coming back to that promise and the consistency and the delivery of the consistent promise. So in the bottling world, that's easy, because in some ways it's like, okay, we're not going to drag water from the East Coast to the West Coast. Now, in the alcohol world, that's different, because that's what they do. But using the carbonated beverage model. So essentially, what happens is, you know, the parent company, the brand owner, has relationships with these bottling companies. And because, for different reasons, you cannot transport cannabis across state lines, we end up in a similar model, which is one brand or a brand can own a facility in one state, or a number of facilities in a state, but typically they don't. It's typically one facility. And then what they need to do is when they want to build that national brand and bring their brand across the country, they realize it's just too expensive. And often there are rules and regulations that preclude them from doing that. For example, they might have to be a state resident. So as an outsider, they can't obtain a cannabis license. So what cannabis brands have done is created licensing agreements where they license their brands to each other. So brand A, let's say who's in California, wants to move into Arizona, and brand B, who's in Arizona, wants to move into California. They often, exchange, assuming that their core capabilities and core competencies are in line. And also assuming that they don't compete with each other. So for example, if one company makes pre-rolls, yes, they want to look for another company that makes pre-rolls, but they also need to be careful that they're not both selling, let's say, top shelf pre-rolls, because then they end up competing with each other. So you don't want to license a competitive product into your state. You want to find a brand that, let's say I'm making pre-rolls in California and I can make chocolate or edibles. I would look to bring in an edibles brand. So now when I go to the dispensary, I can bring them both pre-rolls and edibles, and now I have more to sell. So it's fairly complex, but what becomes even more complicated, to be honest with you, is, let me give you an example. A per serving THC milligram in Massachusetts is 5 milligrams of THC. In Arizona, it's 50. So if you look at a per serving milligrams per milligrams or versus milligrams, it's 10 times the amount in Arizona as it is in Massachusetts. So if you're looking to build a national brand, and again, think consistency, right, you now have, let's say, a chocolate bar that's in Massachusetts, which per serving is 5 milligrams, and now you can go to Arizona and get that same chocolate bar in a perfect world, but at 50 megs of THC. So there's a lot to balance out there, right? Not only, and when I was involved in that exact situation, we actually changed the mold sizes. So the piece of chocolate was much bigger because we wanted people to know we wanted to insinuate it was also stronger. Yeah. So that is not only now, if you're changing the mold size and the dosing, you're also changing the packaging. And then, of course, each state has its rules and regulations that go on top of that. So you're managing a product, you're managing a brand, you're managing the state regulations within each and every state you go into.
And the source material, right? I mean, the source material is different. The underlying product that's being infused into the product, it's tricky. Do you